Hi, I'm Coraline Hayes, and at my own sister's wedding, my stepmother Cathy pointed me toward the kitchen and said, "Stay in there where you belong." Not as a suggestion, not with hesitation, just like it made perfect sense. She said, "Real family handles the important things." But I wasn't even listed in the wedding program. I watched them pose for photos under chandeliers. I'd personally selected, toast with champagne I'd approved, dance on floors I'd had refinished just last month. They moved through Silverstone Manor, like they owned every marble column and crystal fixture. And when the wedding planner Nelson Cole arrived, looking specifically for me, that wasn't their moment of pride. It was their moment of reckoning. But what really shattered me wasn't being treated like hired help. It was realizing they'd spent years making sure I never felt like family in a place that was literally mine. So now I ask you, what would you do if your own family made you feel like a stranger in your own home? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of Cassie's wedding started like most family gatherings in our house, with me being invisible until someone needed something done. I'd been up since 5 a.m., not because I wanted to be, but because Cathy had left me a list of urgent tasks on my nightstand the night before. 23 items, handwritten in her precise script, ranging from arrange the backup flowers to ensure all bathrooms are stocked with premium towels. I found her in the kitchen of our family home, already dressed in her mother of the bride ensemble. A dusty rose silk dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was directing traffic like a general, pointing caterers toward various rooms, checking items off lists attached to multiple clipboards. When she saw me, her expression shifted into that familiar look of mild irritation, as if my presence was a reminder of something unpleasant she'd rather forget. Finally, she said, not looking up from her papers, "The kitchen needs to be completely reorganized before we leave for the venue. The caterers left it a disaster, and I won't have Cassie's wedding day ruined by their incompetence." I glanced around the kitchen. It looked perfectly normal to me. Clean counters, organized supplies, everything in its place. But arguing with Cathy was like trying to negotiate with weather. It happened whether you liked it or not, and resistance only made it worse. "I've already confirmed everything with Silverstone Manor," I said, pulling my own checklist from my purse. "The flowers arrived on schedule, the musicians are set up, and the photographer is doing prep shots of the venue now." Cathy's head snapped up, her penciled eyebrows pulling together in that expression I'd learned to recognize as barely contained annoyance. "I don't recall asking for a report," she said, her voice carrying that edge that meant I'd overstepped some invisible boundary. "I asked you to handle the kitchen." My sister Cassie floated into the room at that moment, looking radiant in her silk robe, her hair in rollers, makeup artist trailing behind her with a tackle box full of cosmetics. She moved like she was already walking down the aisle, all grace and anticipation. "Morning, Cora," she said, giving me a quick smile before turning to Cathy. "Mom, the car service wants to know if we're ready for the first pickup." "Almost, darling," Cathy replied, her entire demeanor transforming into warmth and attention. "We just need to make sure everything here is handled properly before we leave." She turned back to me, and the warmth evaporated like it had never existed. "Coraline, I need you to stay and supervise the final cleanup here. Make sure everything is locked up properly, and that the backup catering supplies make it to the venue. Someone from the family should be responsible for these details." The phrase hung in the air like a challenge. Someone from the family, not family, exactly, but someone adjacent to it. Someone useful. "I was planning to drive over with you," I said carefully. "I have some final coordination to do with the venue staff." Cathy's laugh was light and dismissive. "Oh honey, that's what we hired professionals for. The wedding planner and venue coordinator can handle those details. Besides, someone needs to make sure this house is properly secured. We can't just leave it unattended with all this chaos." Cassie nodded absently, already distracted by the makeup artist showing her lipstick options. "That makes sense," she agreed without really listening. "Thanks for taking care of everything, Cora. You're so good at the behind-the-scenes stuff." Behind-the-scenes stuff. Like I was part of the crew, instead of part of the family. The venue coordinator specifically requested that I be there early. I tried again. There were some last-minute details about the reception layout that Coraline. Cathy's voice cut through my explanation like a blade. "I need you to understand something. Today is about Cassie. It's about our family celebrating this important milestone. It's not about you inserting yourself into moments where you don't belong. The words hit like a physical blow. Don't belong, at my own sister's wedding. I'm not trying to insert myself anywhere, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I just want to make sure everything goes smoothly. And it will, Cathy replied, her tone now saccharine with false patience. Because everyone will be doing their appropriate jobs. The professionals will handle the professional tasks, and family will handle the family responsibilities. You'll be much more useful here, making sure we haven't forgotten anything important. She turned away from me, effectively ending the conversation, and began discussing transportation timing with Cassie. I stood there for a moment, feeling the familiar sensation of being erased in real time. It wasn't new, this feeling of being simultaneously essential and unwanted, but it never stopped stinging. I'd spent the last 6 months helping Cassie plan every detail of this wedding. I'd driven to 3 different dress fittings, sampled cakes at 12 different bakeries, and spent countless evenings helping her create Pinterest boards and spreadsheets. But somehow, in Cathy's version of events, all of that became behind-the-scenes stuff. Important enough to demand my time and energy, but not important enough to earn me a place in the actual family narrative. Fine, I said finally. I'll handle things here and meet you at the venue later. Perfect, Cathy said, still not looking at me. Oh, and wear something appropriate when you do come. Nothing too attention-grabbing. This is Cassie's day. As they swept out of the kitchen in a cloud of perfume and excited chatter, I stood alone among the perfectly organized supplies, feeling like an actress who'd been cut from a play, but was still expected to manage the props. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the morning's messages. There were texts from the florist confirming delivery, updates from the photographer about the lighting, and a missed call from Nelson Cole, the wedding planner. But mixed in with the wedding logistics were other messages, ones that Cathy would never see, and that I'd never think to mention. A text from my property manager. Silverstone Manor, looking spectacular for today's event. All final preparations complete. Another from my accountant, wedding vendor payments processed. Total event cost within projected budget. And one more from my assistant, legal documents updated. Estate ownership records current as of this morning. I deleted each message after reading it, the same way I'd been deleting the evidence of my real life for years. It was easier that way. Easier than trying to explain to people who had already decided who I was supposed to be. I finished organizing the kitchen supplies, locked up the house, and loaded my car with the backup catering items Cathy had insisted were essential. As I drove toward Silverstone Manor, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Nelson Cole 3 days earlier. Miss Hayes, he'd said over the phone. I wanted to confirm that you'll be available for any final decisions that come up during the event. As the venue owner, your approval might be needed for last-minute changes. Please, I'd replied, just handle whatever comes up. I'd prefer to stay low profile during the wedding. He'd paused, clearly confused. But surely your family knows that you own the venue. This is your sister's wedding. It's complicated, I'd said, which was my standard response to questions about my family dynamics. Let's just focus on making sure Cassie has a perfect day. Now driving through the gates of the estate I'd purchased 2 years earlier, I wondered if today would finally be the day that complicated became impossible to ignore. The morning sun was already casting those perfect golden shadows across the manor's limestone facade, highlighting every architectural detail I'd fallen in love with when I first toured the property. In a few hours, this place would be filled with people who thought they knew exactly who I was and where I belonged. They had no idea they were celebrating in a venue that belonged to the woman they'd just sent to handle the cleanup. Silverstone Manor rose from the Pennsylvania countryside like something from a different century, all limestone columns and sweeping staircases, surrounded by gardens that had been featured in 3 different wedding magazines since I'd acquired the property. The circular driveway curved past fountain centerpieces and perfectly manicured hedges, leading to a grand entrance that never failed to make visitors pause and pull out their phones. I'd bought the estate during a particularly low point in my relationship with Cathy's version of our family. One of those periods where I was simultaneously expected to contribute financially to family events, while being reminded that my contributions weren't really necessary. The manor had been on the market for 8 months, priced out of reach for most buyers, but perfect for someone who'd quietly built a portfolio of luxury properties across 3 states. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd purchased the most prestigious wedding venue in the county just months before Cassie got engaged. When she'd shown me pictures of her dream venue on Pinterest, I'd had to hide my smile behind my coffee cup. She was pointing at photographs of my own property, talking about how exclusive and impossible to book Silverstone Manor was. "I know it's completely out of reach," she'd said, scrolling through images of the grand ballroom and garden terraces. "But a girl can dream, right? Maybe if we saved for 5 years." I'd made a phone call that afternoon. By dinner, Cassie had received a call from the venue coordinator, explaining that there had been a last-minute cancellation for her preferred date, and would she be interested in booking the manor at a significant discount. "Family rate," the coordinator had explained, though of course she couldn't explain exactly why. Cassie had cried with joy. Cathy had immediately taken credit for knowing someone who knows someone in the wedding industry. And I'd smiled and congratulated them both, filing away another secret in the growing collection of things my family didn't know about my life. Now pulling into the private owner's parking area behind the catering building, I took a moment to appreciate what I'd created here. The staff moved with choreographed precision across the grounds, setting up ceremony chairs in perfect rows, draping the garden arbor with the exact shade of ivory silk Cassie had spent weeks debating. The morning light caught the crystal chandeliers, visible through the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting prismatic rainbows across the polished marble floors. Everything was exactly as it should be, which wasn't surprising given that I'd been managing every detail for the past 6 months, while pretending to be nothing more than a helpful sister with good connections in the event planning world. Tristan Shaw, my venue operations manager, spotted me as I unloaded the backup catering supplies from my car. He jogged over with that efficient, slightly urgent energy that meant he had updates to share. "Miss Hayes," he said, keeping his voice low even though we were well out of earshot of any arriving guests. "Everything's on schedule. The musicians finished their sound check, the photographer has been working since sunrise, and the florist just put the finishing touches on the ceremony backdrop." He paused, consulting his tablet. "Nelson Cole arrived about an hour ago and has been asking for you. I told him you were handling some off-site logistics, but he seemed insistent about confirming some final details." I glanced toward the main house, where I could see elegantly dressed figures moving through the windows. The wedding party would be arriving soon for their pre-ceremony photos, followed by the guests. The carefully orchestrated timeline that I'd spent months perfecting was already in motion. "What kind of details?" I asked. Tristan scrolled through his notes. Something about the seating arrangements for family members, and he wanted to confirm the protocol for any last-minute changes that might need owner approval. He seemed confused about the family dynamics. Of course he was. I'd deliberately kept my explanations vague when booking the wedding, identifying myself simply as a family member handling the arrangements. Nelson was an experienced wedding planner who'd worked at dozens of high-end venues, and he understood that complex family situations required diplomatic navigation. But he was also thorough enough to want clear lines of authority when it came to final decisions. "I'll find him in a few minutes," I said. "What about the guest arrival timeline?" "First guests are expected in about 2 hours. VIP family members," he checked his notes, "including a Mrs. Cathy Thorne and the bridal party, should be arriving within the hour for photos." Mrs. Cathy Thorne. Not the bride's mother or Miss Hayes' family, but the formal designation that appeared on all the venue paperwork. It was a small detail, but one that highlighted the strange space I occupied in my own family's events. Important enough to handle logistics and cover expenses, but distant enough to be listed separately in official documentation. "Perfect," I said. "I'll be in my office if you need me for anything urgent. Otherwise, just follow the timeline we discussed." Tristan nodded and headed back toward the main house, leaving me alone with the backup catering supplies and the surreal reality of preparing to attend my sister's wedding at my own venue, while pretending to be nothing more than a helpful family member. I made my way through the service entrance and up the back staircase to the small office I maintained on the second floor of the manor. It was tucked away behind the bridal suite, accessible through a discreet door that most guests never noticed. From the window I had a perfect view of the ceremony site and the garden where cocktail hour would take place. The office was my sanctuary during events. A place where I could monitor everything without being visible, where I could make executive decisions without disrupting the carefully maintained fiction that I was just another guest. I designed it specifically for situations like this, when I needed to be present as an owner but invisible as a family member. I settled at my desk and pulled up the digital timeline that would guide every moment of the next 8 hours. Musicians would begin the prelude at exactly 4:30. The processional would start at 5 o'clock. Cocktail hour would transition to dinner at 6:45. Dancing would begin at 8:30 and continue until midnight, when the venue sound ordinance required us to move the celebration indoors. Every minute was accounted for, every potential problem anticipated and solved. I'd coordinated weddings for senators' daughters and tech executives' sons, but none of those events had required the delicate balance of family dynamics that this one demanded. My phone buzzed with a text from Cathy. Just left the house. Can't wait to see everything set up. You're the best for handling all the last-minute stuff. Another message followed immediately. Mom says you're coming later. Don't forget to wear something nice, but not too nice. Lol. I stared at that second message for a long moment. Don't forget to wear something nice, but not too nice. Even in Cassie's casual text, Cathy's voice came through clearly. Be present enough to be useful, but not so present that you distract from the real family members. I opened my closet. Yes, I kept a full wardrobe at the manor, and considered my options. I'd originally planned to wear a deep navy dress that was elegant but understated. Now I wondered if even that might be considered too nice by Cathy's standards. Through my office window, I could see the first vendor trucks making their final deliveries. The cake had arrived, a 3-tier masterpiece that had required 5 tastings to perfect. The upgraded floral arrangements were being positioned around the ceremony site, each one placed according to specifications I'd approved personally. The premium sound system was running final tests, ensuring that every word of the vows would be heard clearly from every seat. Everything was falling into place exactly as I'd planned, at a venue I owned, for a family that would spend the entire day treating me like hired help. I checked the time, 11:30 a.m. In 5.5 hours, my sister would walk down an aisle I'd designed, in front of guests who had no idea they were celebrating on my property, while my stepmother continued to orchestrate my invisibility in my own space. It was going to be an interesting day. The first cars began arriving at 12:45, exactly 15 minutes ahead of the schedule I'd meticulously planned. From my office window, I watched as the bridal party emerged from a white SUV in a flurry of garment bags and makeup cases, their laughter carrying across the perfectly manicured grounds. Cassie stepped out last, already radiant, even in her casual pre-wedding outfit, her eyes immediately scanning the manor's facade with obvious delight. I grabbed my purse and headed downstairs, timing my arrival to coincide with theirs. As the venue's owner, I should have been greeting them at the front entrance, ensuring their every need was met from the moment they arrived. Instead, I slipped out through the garden entrance, approaching from the side like any other family member arriving to help with preparations. Coraline, Cassie spotted me first, rushing over with her arms outstretched. Oh my God, this place is even more beautiful than in the photos. How did you manage to arrange all of them? Before I could answer, Cathy materialized beside us, her mother of the bride energy in full force. She wore that particular smile she reserved for public moments, warm and gracious on the surface, but with an underlying steel that warned against any disruption to her carefully orchestrated narrative. Cassie darling, we need to get you inside for your hair appointment, she said, smoothly inserting herself between us. Coraline, I'm so glad you made it. Could you handle the gift transport? Some of the presents from this morning need to be moved to the gift table inside. She gestured toward the SUV, where I could see several wrapped boxes and gift bags still sitting in the cargo area. It wasn't a request, despite the pleasant tone. It was an assignment delivered with the kind of casual authority that made refusal seem petty and unreasonable. Of course, I said, because what else could I say, with Cassie standing there glowing with happiness and half the bridal party watching our interaction. Perfect, Cathy replied, already turning away. And once that's done, could you check with the catering staff about the timeline for the appetizer service? I want to make sure everything is synchronized properly. She was doing it again. is positioning me as the family member responsible for coordinating with the staff, while she handled the important family responsibilities. It was a role I'd been unconsciously assigned years ago, the person who interfaced with vendors and handled logistics while the real family members focused on being present and celebrating. I started loading the gifts onto a nearby cart, listening as Cathy began directing the bridal party toward the manor's main entrance. Ladies will be getting ready in the bridal suite on the second floor. It has the most beautiful natural lighting, and I've been told it's where all the most exclusive brides prepare for their ceremonies. All the most exclusive brides. I'd personally designed that suite, from the custom vanity lighting, to the champagne station, to the private balcony overlooking the gardens. Every detail had been carefully planned to create the perfect pre-wedding environment. But hearing Cathy describe it as something the venue provided rather than something I'd created was like watching someone else take credit for my own thoughts. As I wheeled the gift cart toward the manor's side entrance, the service entrance, I realized not the grand front doors the bridal party had used. I passed a group of early arriving family members I recognized from various holiday gatherings. My Aunt Genevieve, Cathy's sister, was standing near the fountain with two of my cousins, all of them taking photos and marveling at the venue. "Coraline," Aunt Genevieve called out when she spotted me. "How lovely to see you, dear. Are you helping with the setup?" There it was again. Are you helping with the setup? Not are you here for the wedding? Or how exciting that Cassie chose this beautiful venue. The automatic assumption that my presence meant I was working rather than celebrating. "Just moving some gifts," I replied, forcing a smile. "How thoughtful of you," she said, already turning back to her photo session. "This place is absolutely stunning. Cathy must have incredible connections to book somewhere this exclusive." Cathy's connections. I wheeled the cart faster, eager to get away from the conversation before someone asked me to take a photo of them in front of my own property. Inside the manor, the transformation was complete. The main hallway had been dressed with silk draping and cascading floral arrangements. The crystal chandeliers had been polished to perfection, and soft classical music was playing through the sound system I'd had specially installed. Everything looked exactly as I'd envisioned when I first toured this property and imagined the events it could host. I found the gift table in the reception area and began arranging the presents, taking care to maintain the aesthetic I'd specified for the display. As I worked, I could hear voices drifting down from the bridal suite upstairs. Laughter, excitement, the happy chaos of women preparing for a wedding. My sister's voice rose above the others occasionally, bright with joy and anticipation. "Coraline," a voice behind me made me turn. It was Lovely Shaw, one of Cassie's bridesmaids and a friend from college. "I thought that was you. Are you not getting ready with us upstairs?" The question hit differently than the others, because it came from genuine surprise, rather than assumption. Lovely actually seemed confused about why I wasn't part of the bridal party preparations. "Oh, I'm not a bridesmaid," I said, arranging another gift on the table to avoid meeting her eyes directly. "But you're her sister," Lovely said, her confusion deepening. "And I know you've been helping plan everything. Cassie talks about you all the time. How you've been handling so much of the coordination and logistics. Someone needs to make sure the details are taken care of," I replied, which wasn't really an answer, but was the kind of response that usually ended these conversations. But Lovely didn't let it drop. "That's exactly why I thought you'd be getting ready with us. You've done so much work to make this perfect. This venue is incredible. How did you guys find it?" Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much, Cathy appeared at the bottom of the staircase, her timing impeccable as always. "Lovely sweetheart, we need you upstairs for the group photos," she called out. "The photographer wants to start with the bridesmaids before Cassie gets into her dress." Lovely started toward the stairs, then paused and looked back at me. "You should come up too, Coraline. I'm sure they'd want some sister photos." "Actually," Cathy interjected smoothly, "Coraline has been so helpful with all the logistics today. I think she's more comfortable handling the coordination side of things. Aren't you, dear?" The question was phrased as if she were being considerate of my preferences, but the underlying message was clear. "This is where you belong, and this is where you'll stay." "Right," I said, because disagreeing would have required an explanation I wasn't prepared to give. "I'll just finish setting up down here." Lovely looked between Cathy and me, clearly sensing an undercurrent she didn't understand. But the pull of wedding festivities and group photos won out, and she headed upstairs with a quick "see you later." I watched them disappear up the grand staircase, the staircase I'd had restored to its original 1920s grandeur.
and went back to arranging gifts at a table positioned in a ballroom I owned, while my family got ready for pictures in a bridal suite I'd designed. For a wedding being held at a venue that was mine in every legal sense except the one that mattered to the people upstairs, my phone buzzed. A text from Nelson Cole. Miss Hayes, could we meet briefly before the ceremony? A few items need your approval as venue owner. I quickly typed back, handle whatever comes up. I trust your judgment completely. The last thing I needed was Nelson approaching me in front of my family, addressing me as the venue owner, while Cathy was busy casting me as the helpful family logistics coordinator. From upstairs, I could hear the photographer calling out instructions and the sounds of excited preparation. Down here, I arranged gifts and coordinated with staff, occupying the same space I'd inhabited at every family event for the past decade. Essential but invisible, helpful but separate, present but not really part of the story being told. By 2:30 p.m., the venue was buzzing with activity, and I had become what I always became at family events, the invisible coordinator. While the bridal party posed for photos on the grand staircase I'd had custom restored, I found myself stationed near the catering entrance, fielding questions from vendors, and handling the steady stream of small issues that Cathy had decided were my responsibility. Coraline, could you check on the flower arrangements in the ceremony space? I want to make sure they're positioned correctly, she'd asked during a brief break between photo sessions. Not would you mind, or could you help? Just the kind of casual direction that suggested my availability for such tasks was simply assumed. I'd spent 20 minutes with the florist, adjusting arrangements that were already perfect, while through the garden windows, I could see my family laughing and posing for what would become the official wedding album. Every few minutes, someone would call out, "Get one without me," and they'd rearrange themselves into a smaller, tighter group that somehow never seemed to have space for one more person. When I returned to report that the flowers were positioned correctly, I found Cathy directing a complicated group photo that included extended family members I barely saw except at weddings and funerals. Aunts, uncles, cousins and family friends were all carefully arranged on the manor's front steps, the photographer moving between them to capture the perfect shot. "That's beautiful," the photographer called out. "Now let's do one with just the immediate family." I started to move toward the group, but Cathy's hand landed gently on my arm. "Actually, sweetie, could you grab my emergency kit from upstairs? I think Cassie might need some touch-up powder before the ceremony photos." Her voice was warm and considerate, but her grip on my arm was firm. "It's in the blue bag on the vanity in the bridal suite." I looked at the group assembling for the immediate family photo. Dad would have been in that picture, I thought. If he were still alive, would I be standing there too? Or would Cathy still find a reason to send me on an errand? "Of course," I said, because the alternative was to create a scene at my sister's wedding. By the time I returned with the powder kit, Cathy probably didn't actually need. The family photos were finished, and everyone was dispersing to prepare for the ceremony. I handed over the kit, and watched as Cathy immediately set it aside without opening it.
"Perfect timing," she said. "Now I need you to do me a huge favor. Some of the older guests are arriving early, and they're having trouble with the seating arrangements. Could you help them find their seats and make sure they're comfortable? You're so good with people." I looked toward the ceremony space, where elderly relatives were indeed wandering among the perfectly arranged white chairs, clutching their programs and looking slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the venue. It was exactly the kind of task that needed to be handled with care and patience. It was also exactly the kind of task that would keep me busy and visible as a helper rather than a family member during the crucial pre-ceremony period when final photos were being taken and last-minute preparations were being made. "Uncle Alvin," I called out, spotting Cathy's elderly uncle near the back rows, "let me help you find your seat." For the next 30 minutes, I guided guests to their assigned places, answered questions about the venue's history, carefully omitting my own role in that history, and helped elderly relatives navigate the limestone pathways in their formal shoes. It was satisfying work, actually. I enjoyed making sure everyone felt welcomed and comfortable, but I was also acutely aware that I was doing it in a navy dress that Cathy had deemed appropriate but not too attention-grabbing, while my family members floated through the space in their carefully chosen wedding attire, posing for candid shots and accepting compliments on the beautiful venue they'd somehow managed to book. "Excuse me, miss," an older woman I didn't recognize approached me with a confused expression. "I think there might be an error with the seating chart. I'm looking for the family section, but I can't find my name anywhere." I checked her invitation and cross-referenced it with the master list on my phone. You're Mrs. Charlotte Green, correct? You should be in row 4, section B. Oh, wonderful, thank you so much, she said, then paused. Are you with the wedding planning company? You seem to know everything about the arrangements. Before I could answer, my cousin Julian appeared beside us. Coraline, there you are. Mom's looking for you, something about the guest book table setup. Mrs. Green looked between us with dawning recognition. Oh, your family, I'm so sorry, dear, I thought you were staff, you're just so helpful and professional. Julian laughed. That's our Coraline, always taking care of the details. She's like our family's personal event coordinator. They both smiled at what they clearly thought was a compliment, but the words landed like small cuts. Our family's personal event coordinator. Not Cassie's sister or part of the wedding party, just the person who handled things. I excused myself and headed toward the guest book table, where Cathy was indeed waiting with another task. This time it was repositioning the gift card box and adjusting the table linens to create a better backdrop for photos. As I worked, I watched the official wedding photographer move through the ceremony space, capturing detail shots of the flowers, the architecture, the carefully arranged elements that would become part of Cassie's wedding album. He paused at the guest book table, waiting for me to finish my adjustments before taking his shots. I stepped back to give him space, and he nodded his thanks. Beautiful venue, he commented as he worked. I've shot a lot of weddings, but this place is something special. The family must have incredible connections to book Silverstone Manor. Something like that, I replied. The owner has exquisite taste, he continued, adjusting his lens to capture the way the afternoon light hit the crystal details of the guest book display. Every detail is perfectly thought out. You can tell this place is run by someone who really understands luxury events. I murmured agreement and moved away before he could ask any more questions about the owner whose taste he was admiring. Near the garden entrance, I spotted Nelson Cole in deep conversation with Tristan Shaw, both of them holding tablets and wearing the focused expressions of professionals managing a complex event. Nelson looked up and caught my eye, then started walking in my direction with obvious purpose. My stomach tightened. This was exactly what I'd been trying to avoid, any public interaction with the wedding planner that might reveal my actual role here. Coraline, Cathy's voice called out before Nelson could reach me. I need you to check with the musicians about the processional timing. Cassie wants to make sure the music starts at exactly the right moment. I glanced between Cathy and the approaching Nelson, realizing that I was about to have to choose between handling my stepmother's latest assignment and dealing with whatever venue issue needed my attention as the owner. Actually, Mrs. Thorne, Nelson said, arriving at our small group with his professional smile in place, I was hoping to speak with Coraline about a few final details. Cathy's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, her smile tightening around the edges. Oh, I'm sure that's not necessary. Coraline's been helping with family coordination, but for any venue-related issues, you should probably speak with me directly. I'm the mother of the bride. Nelson looked confused, consulting his tablet before responding. Of course, Mrs. Thorne, it's just that I had understood that Miss Hayes was the primary contact for. He paused, clearly trying to navigate what seemed like a delicate family dynamic. For family logistics, yes, Cathy said smoothly. But I think you'll find it more efficient to work directly with me on any venue concerns. I watched this exchange with growing dread, realizing that my carefully maintained secret was about to collide with my family's carefully maintained fiction about my role in their lives. And we were still 2 hours away from the ceremony. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the ceremony space, when my phone started its steady stream of notifications. I'd set it to silent, but the constant buzzing in my purse was becoming impossible to ignore. Each vibration represented another detail of my real life attempting to intrude on the careful performance I was maintaining for my family. I slipped away from the pre-ceremony preparations and ducked into a quiet alcove near the manor's library to check my messages. What I found was the usual array of communications that came with owning a high-end event venue on a busy Saturday in late spring. Miss Hayes, the Henderson anniversary party next weekend requires approval for upgraded linens. Please confirm by Monday. Tristan Shaw, estate insurance renewal documents need your signature. Can we schedule for Tuesday? My business manager Architectural Digest wants to schedule the photo shoot for the fall issue. The spread on America's most exclusive wedding venues would feature Silverstone prominently. My PR coordinator. I quickly deleted each message after reading it, the same way I'd been covering my tracks for years. But as I was about to slip the phone back into my purse, another notification appeared that made me pause. Property tax assessment complete. Silverstone Manor appraised at $8.2 million for current fiscal year. Please review attached documents. County Assessor's Office $8.2 million. The venue where my family was celebrating, where Cathy was directing everyone around like she'd personally arranged this exclusive booking, was worth more than most people would see in several lifetimes. And it was mine, purchased outright 2 years ago during a particularly profitable quarter for my property investment company. Coraline, a voice made me look up from my phone screen. It was Alden Finch, one of Cassie's groomsmen and someone I'd known casually through family events for years. Everything okay? You look like you just got some intense news. I quickly locked my phone and slipped it back into my purse. Just coordinating some logistics for the reception. Alden nodded, accepting the explanation easily. He was a nice guy, the kind of person who took things at face value and didn't probe deeper than social politeness required. This place is unreal, by the way. How did Cassie manage to book Silverstone Manor? I thought it was impossible to get, unless you were like, royalty or something. Lucky timing, I said, which was technically true. Must have cost a fortune though. He continued, then quickly looked embarrassed. Sorry, that's probably not my business. It's just that my buddy got married last year and looked into this place, and they quoted him something ridiculous like 50 grand just for the venue rental. 50,000 was actually our starting price for off-season weekdays. Peak season Saturday rates were considerably higher. But I just smiled and gave him the kind of vague response that indicated the topic was beyond my knowledge. I'm sure Cathy handled all those details, I said. Alden nodded and was about to respond when Nelson Cole appeared in the archway, his tablet in hand and wearing the expression of someone who needed to resolve something important before the ceremony began. Miss Hayes, he said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do need to discuss the evening timeline with you. There are a few elements that require owner approval, and Mrs. Thorne suggested I speak with you about family preferences. I felt Alden's attention sharpen beside me. Owner approval. The phrase hung in the air like a question mark. I'm sure whatever decisions need to be made, Cathy can handle them, I said quickly. She's been managing most of the wedding coordination. But Nelson was already shaking his head. I'm afraid these particular decisions need to come from the venue ownership level. Insurance requirements, you understand. Municipal permits require certain signatures for evening events, and the catering extension permits specifically need. He paused, consulting his tablet. Miss Coraline Hayes' approval as the designated property owner. The silence that followed was the kind that makes you acutely aware of your own heartbeat. Alden was staring at me with an expression of complete confusion, his brain clearly working to process what he'd just heard. Property owner, he said slowly. Wait, you own this place? I could feel my carefully constructed anonymity beginning to crumble in real time. It's complicated, I said, which was becoming my standard response to increasingly impossible situations. Complicated how? Alden pressed. Either you own Silverstone Manor or you don't. Before I could formulate a response that might salvage the situation, my phone buzzed again with an incoming call. The caller ID showed, Caius Hayes, an IST attorney, and I knew that whatever he was calling about probably couldn't wait until after the ceremony. I need to take this, I said, stepping further into the alcove. Excuse me for just a moment. Coraline, Caius's voice was crisp and professional when I answered. I know you're at an event today, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention. The Whitmore Foundation is trying to dispute the zoning variance for your Lancaster property, and their legal team is demanding documentation of your ownership status for all Pennsylvania holdings. The Lancaster property was a 12-acre estate I'd purchased 6 months earlier, and was converting into a destination wedding venue. The Whitmore Foundation was run by a social climbing family who'd been trying to establish their own event venue in the same area, and apparently didn't appreciate the competition. What kind of documentation? I asked, keeping my voice low. Complete ownership records, proof of financing, property development permits, basically anything that would establish your legitimate claim to the portfolio. They're suggesting that someone your age couldn't possibly have acquired these properties through legitimate means. Someone my age. I was 32 years old and had been building my real estate portfolio since I was 25, but apparently the Whitmore Foundation found it easier to question my legitimacy than to accept that they'd been outmaneuvered by a competitor they'd underestimated. Email me the specifics, I said. I'll have everything they need by Monday morning. Already sent, and Coraline, they've hired the Blackstone Group to represent them. This isn't going to be a simple property dispute. They're serious about trying to challenge your holdings. The Blackstone Group was one of the most aggressive legal firms in the state, the kind of lawyers you hired when you wanted to destroy someone, rather than simply defeat them. The fact that they were targeting my property empire while I stood in the garden of my own venue, being treated like hired help by my own family, felt like some kind of cosmic joke. Let them try, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. Send me everything, and I'll handle it. I ended the call and turned back to find Alden watching me with an expression of growing comprehension. Estate attorney, he said quietly. Property disputes. Coraline, what exactly do you do for a living? Before I could answer, the sound of string quartet music drifted across the garden, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. In the distance I could see guests beginning to take their seats, and the wedding party would be lining up for the processional any moment. We should get back, I said, avoiding his question entirely. But as we walked toward the ceremony space, I could feel Alden's puzzled glances and knew that my carefully maintained secret was beginning to unravel. The problem with living two different lives was that eventually, the boundaries between them started to blur, and the truth had a way of insisting on being acknowledged. Through the garden archway, I could see Cathy directing final preparations with the smooth efficiency of someone who believed she was managing an event at a venue her family had somehow managed to book through connections and good fortune. She had no idea she was standing on property I owned, giving directions to staff I employed, orchestrating a wedding that was only possible because of resources I'd provided. But something told me that was about to change. Intro hook, 150 words. Hi, I'm Coraline Hayes, and at my own sister's wedding my stepmother Cathy pointed me toward the kitchen and said, "Stay in there where you belong." Not as a suggestion, not with hesitation, just like it made perfect sense. She said, "Real family handles the important things." But I wasn't even listed in the wedding program. I watched them pose for photos under chandeliers I'd personally selected, toast with champagne I'd approved, dance on floors I'd had refinished just last month. They moved through Silverstone Manor like they owned every marble column and crystal fixture, and when the wedding planner Nelson Cole arrived looking specifically for me, that wasn't their moment of pride. It was their moment of reckoning. But what really shattered me wasn't being treated like hired help. It was realizing they'd spent years making sure I never felt like family in a place that was literally mine. So now I ask you, what would you do if your own family made you feel like a stranger in your own home? The ceremony began at exactly 5 p.m., just as I'd scheduled it 6 months earlier when I'd personally coordinated every detail with the string quartet, photographer and officiant. I stood in the back row of guests, watching my sister walk down an aisle lined with white roses I'd selected, toward an altar positioned perfectly to catch the golden hour light streaming through the garden's ancient oak trees. Everything was flawless, exactly as I'd envisioned when I'd first toured this property and imagined the weddings it could host. But instead of feeling pride in what I'd created, I felt the familiar sensation of watching my own life from the outside, like a ghost haunting her own success story. Cathy sat in the front row, radiant in her mother of the bride glory, accepting whispered compliments from other guests about the venue's beauty and exclusivity. I could hear fragments of conversations floating back to where I stood. How did they manage to book this place? The connections they must have. This must have cost a fortune. Each comment felt like another layer of distance between the reality of my life and the story my family preferred to tell about it. During the exchange of vows, my phone vibrated against my purse with what felt like every 30 seconds. I ignored it through the ceremony, but the constant buzzing was becoming impossible to dismiss. Finally, during the recessional, I slipped away from the crowd and checked my messages. What I found made my stomach drop. Miss Hayes, urgent. Lancaster County filed an injunction against tonight's catering extension. Need your immediate response. Tristan Shaw Property Insurance Company requiring immediate contact regarding venue liability coverage. Multiple calls to main number. My business manager media inquiry. Pittsburgh Business Journal wants statement about your venue portfolio for Monday's feature on young Pennsylvania entrepreneurs. PR coordinator. And then the one that made me close my eyes and take a deep breath. Federal tax inquiry regarding property acquisition timeline. IRS requesting documentation for 2019 to 2023 real estate transactions. Please call immediately. My accountant. The timing was impossibly bad.
Here I was, trying to maintain the fiction that I was just a helpful family member at my sister's wedding, while my actual business empire was apparently under coordinated attack from multiple directions. The Whitmore Foundation wasn't just challenging one property. They were systematically questioning my entire portfolio, and they'd somehow managed to involve federal agencies in their investigation. Coraline, Nelson Cole's voice made me look up from my phone. He was approaching with Tristan Shaw beside him, both wearing expressions of barely contained urgency. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have several situations that require immediate owner approval before the reception can proceed. I glanced around, making sure no family members were within earshot. The cocktail hour had just begun, and most guests were gathered near the manor's terrace, accepting champagne and sampling the appetizers I'd spent weeks perfecting with the catering team. What kind of situations? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Tristan consulted his tablet. The county is questioning our permits for extended evening service. Apparently someone filed a complaint alleging that we don't have proper documentation for events lasting past 10 p.m. They're threatening to shut down the reception unless we can provide immediate proof of compliance. Additionally, Nelson continued, the catering company is reporting that their insurance provider received an anonymous tip questioning whether the venue's liability coverage is sufficient for tonight's guest count. They need written confirmation from the property owner before they can continue service. I felt the walls closing in. Someone, almost certainly the Whitmore Foundation, was orchestrating a systematic campaign to disrupt not just my business operations but this specific event. They were trying to ruin my sister's wedding as collateral damage in their attempt to challenge my property holdings. How immediate is immediate? I asked. The county inspector is en route, Tristan said. He'll be here within the hour, and he's specifically requesting to speak with Miss Coraline Hayes, listed as the primary property owner. The blood drained from my face. A county inspector arriving at my sister's wedding reception, asking to speak with me by name, in front of my entire family who had no idea I owned the venue. It was my worst nightmare coming true in real time. Can we handle this remotely? I asked. Legal documentation, phone calls, anything that doesn't require. I'm afraid not, Nelson interrupted gently. The inspector was very specific. He needs to verify the owner's identity in person on the property before any permits can be validated. Over Nelson's shoulder I could see Cathy holding court near the cocktail station, gesturing toward the manor's architecture as she explained to a group of guests how she'd discovered this hidden gem through a contact in the luxury event planning world. Her version of events made it sound like she'd personally uncovered some secret venue through superior networking skills. There's something else, Tristan said, consulting his tablet again. The photographer from the Pittsburgh Business Journal is here. He says he's covering tonight's event as part of a feature on young entrepreneurs who are reshaping Pennsylvania's luxury market. He specifically mentioned wanting to photograph you with the venue. My hands went cold. A business journalist at my sister's wedding, wanting to photograph me in connection with my property portfolio. If he identified me publicly as the venue owner in front of my family, how would he even know about tonight's event? I asked. Someone called in a tip, Tristan replied. Anonymous source, suggesting that tonight would be a perfect opportunity to see one of your properties in action, with you personally overseeing the event. The pieces clicked into place. The Whitmore Foundation wasn't just challenging my business legally. They were trying to expose my personal life, using my sister's wedding as the stage for their revelation. They'd somehow discovered the connection between the venue and my family, and they were orchestrating a public unmasking designed to cause maximum personal and professional damage. Where is this photographer now? I asked. Nelson pointed toward the garden entrance, where I could see a man with professional camera equipment speaking with some of the guests. He was showing them a business card and asking questions, clearly working to identify key family members. He's been asking about you specifically, Nelson continued, wanting to know which family member is the successful entrepreneur and when would be the best time to get photos with the venue owner. I felt panic rising in my chest. Every carefully constructed boundary between my public success and my private family dynamics was about to collapse simultaneously, in front of 200 wedding guests, during my sister's most important moment. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Cathy, my attorney. I have to take this, I told Nelson and Tristan. Give me 5 minutes to figure out our options. I answered the call while walking quickly toward the manor's side entrance, seeking privacy before everything exploded. Coraline, Cathy's voice was tense. I've been analyzing the Whitmore Foundation's strategy, and I think you need to know what you're really dealing with. this isn't just a property dispute. They've hired a private investigation firm to research your background, your family connections, and your personal life. What does that mean? I asked, though I was starting to suspect I knew. It means they know about tonight. They know about your sister's wedding, they know you own the venue, and they're deliberately timing their attacks to cause maximum disruption during a significant family event. This is psychological warfare disguised as legal challenge. Through the manor's windows, I could see my family mingling with guests, completely unaware that their celebration was about to become the center of a very public business battle. They're trying to force me into a corner, I said. Exactly. They want you to choose between protecting your business interests and protecting your family's privacy. They think if they can create enough chaos during a personal event, you'll capitulate to their demands rather than fight back. But as I watched Cathy graciously accepting compliments on her venue booking, and Cassie glowing with happiness as guests marveled at the beautiful setting someone in the family had managed to arrange, I felt something shift inside me. They thought they could use my family against me, not realizing that my family had been using me against myself for years. What do they want? I asked. Controlling interest in your Lancaster property, below-market purchase options on 2 of your other venues, and your agreement to stay out of the central Pennsylvania market for 5 years. Essentially, they want you to hand over half your portfolio and disappear from their competitive landscape. And if I refuse, they'll continue escalating. More injunctions, more investigations, more public scrutiny. They'll make sure every business decision you make becomes a legal battle, and they'll use events like tonight to make sure the conflict impacts your personal life as well. I looked back toward the reception, where my family was celebrating in a venue they didn't know I owned, at a wedding I'd made possible but received no credit for, surrounded by guests who assumed someone else deserved praise for the beautiful setting. Chaos, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. What happens if I decide to stop hiding who I am? There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean, what if instead of trying to manage this situation quietly, I let everyone know exactly who owns this venue, who made this wedding possible, and who the Whitmore Foundation is really trying to intimidate? Coraline, Hayes said carefully, that would be a significant escalation. Once you go public with your ownership of the venue, there's no going back to anonymity. Through the garden windows, I could see the county inspector's car pulling into the main driveway. In a few minutes, he would be asking for me by name, in front of everyone. My carefully maintained secret was about to be revealed whether I wanted it to be or not. The only question was whether I would control the narrative, or let it control me. Send me everything we have on the Whitmore Foundation, I said. Financial records, board members, property holdings, legal history, everything. What are you planning? I watched as the business journalist approached Cathy, clearly asking her questions about the venue and the family responsible for tonight's celebration. She was gesturing grandly, no doubt taking credit for arrangements she'd had nothing to do with. I'm planning to stop letting other people tell my story, I said. Intro hook, 150 words. Hi, I'm Coraline Hayes, and at my own sister's wedding my stepmother Cathy pointed me toward the kitchen and said, stay in there where you belong. Not as a suggestion, not with hesitation, just like it made perfect sense. She said, real family handles the important things. But I wasn't even listed in the wedding program. I watched them pose for photos under chandeliers I'd personally selected, toast with champagne I'd approved, dance on floors I'd had refinished just last month. They moved through Silverstone Manor like they owned every marble column and crystal fixture. And when the wedding planner Nelson Cole arrived looking specifically for me, that wasn't their moment of pride. It was their moment of reckoning. But what really shattered me wasn't being treated like hired help. It was realizing they'd spent years making sure I never felt like family in a place that was literally mine. So now I ask you, what would you do if your own family made you feel like a stranger in your own home? I ended the call with chaos, and stood for a moment in the manor's marble foyer, listening to the sounds of celebration drifting in from the garden. Laughter, clinking glasses, the gentle murmur of 200 guests enjoying what they believed was simply a beautiful wedding at an exclusive venue that my family had somehow managed to book. None of them knew they were celebrating on property I owned, eating food I'd approved, dancing to music playing through a sound system I'd personally selected. In about 10 minutes, that was all going to change. Through the tall windows, I could see the county inspector stepping out of his official vehicle, clipboard in hand, wearing the grim expression of someone who'd been called to investigate permit violations during a wedding reception. Behind him the business journalist was setting up his camera equipment, clearly positioning himself to capture whatever drama was about to unfold. The Whitmore Foundation had orchestrated this perfectly. They'd timed their attack to cause maximum personal humiliation during my sister's most important day, betting that I would choose family peace over business interests. They'd calculated that I would rather surrender portions of my property portfolio than allow my carefully hidden success to be exposed in front of people who'd spent years treating me like hired help. They'd miscalculated. I straightened my navy dress, checked my reflection in the foyer's antique mirror, and walked back toward the reception with the kind of calm determination that comes from finally deciding to stop hiding who you are. The cocktail hour was in full swing. Guests scattered across the terraced gardens with champagne flutes and small plates, everyone marveling at the venue's beauty while Cathy continued to hold court near the main bar, graciously accepting compliments on the family's incredible booking.
Coraline. Cassie appeared beside me, radiant in her wedding dress, her face glowing with the kind of happiness that makes everything else seem secondary. Isn't this perfect? I can't believe how beautiful everything turned out. Cathy said you helped coordinate some of the vendor details. I thank you so much for everything. Some of the vendor details. I'd personally selected every vendor, approved every menu item, designed the entire event timeline, and owned the property where it was all taking place. But I just smiled and squeezed her hand. I'm so happy for you, I said and meant it. Whatever was about to happen, Cassie deserved to enjoy this moment before the family dynamics exploded around her. Ladies and gentlemen, Nelson Cole's voice came through the discreet speaker system, smooth and professional. If I could have your attention for just a moment, we have a brief administrative matter to address before dinner service begins. I felt my heart rate accelerate. This was it, the moment when my two worlds collided in front of everyone who mattered to me. The guests began to quiet, turning toward where Nelson stood on the terrace's main platform. He looked polished and confident, but I could see the tension around his eyes. He knew what was coming as well as I did. We have a county inspector here, who needs to speak with the venue ownership regarding some permit documentation, Nelson continued. This is just a routine verification, and it shouldn't take more than a few minutes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Guests began looking around, clearly wondering why a county inspector would interrupt a wedding reception and who exactly he needed to speak with. That's when Inspector Tyler Thorne stepped onto the terrace, his official badge visible on his suit jacket, carrying a folder of documents that looked official and ominous. He was a tall man in his 50s with the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested he'd dealt with permit violations at luxury events before and wasn't impressed by wealth or social status. I'm looking for Miss Coraline Hayes, he announced, his voice carrying easily across the garden. Listed as the primary property owner of Silverstone Manor, I need to speak with her regarding permit compliance for tonight's event. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 guests turned to scan the crowd, looking for someone they clearly expected to be part of the venue management team. Several people looked toward Cathy, assuming she would direct them to whoever this Coraline Hayes person might be. Cathy herself looked confused and slightly annoyed, as if the inspector had made some kind of mistake. She stepped forward with her practiced hostess smile. I think there might be some confusion, she said smoothly. I'm Mrs. Cathy Thorne, the mother of the bride. I handled all the venue arrangements for tonight's celebration. Perhaps you could speak with me about whatever permits you need to verify. Inspector Thorne consulted his documents, his expression unchanged. Ma'am, I appreciate your willingness to help, but I specifically need to speak with the property owner. According to our records, that's Miss Coraline Hayes. He looked around the crowd again. Is Miss Hayes present? The murmurs were getting louder now. Guests were starting to whisper among themselves, clearly confused about why a county inspector was looking for someone named Coraline Hayes at what they thought was a family wedding at a rented venue. That's when Alden Finch stepped forward, his face showing the dawning comprehension of someone who'd been putting pieces together all afternoon. Coraline, he called out, looking directly at me. I think the inspector is looking for you. Every head in the garden turned toward me. 200 pairs of eyes suddenly focused on the woman they'd seen arranging gifts, coordinating with vendors, and handling logistics all day. The woman Cathy had repeatedly sent on errands and positioned as family help rather than family. The woman who apparently owned the venue where they were all celebrating. I felt the weight of their stares, the confusion and surprise rippling through the crowd, as they tried to reconcile the person they thought they knew with what they were hearing. My Aunt Genevieve had her mouth open in shock. Several cousins were looking between me and Cathy with expressions of complete bewilderment. And Cathy looked like someone had just told her that gravity was optional. Her face had gone pale, her carefully arranged composure cracking as she stared at me with an expression that moved rapidly from confusion to understanding, to something that looked uncomfortably like horror. Miss Hayes, Inspector Thorne prompted, looking in my direction. Could I speak with you regarding the permit verification? I took a deep breath and stepped forward, moving through the crowd that parted around me like I was carrying something contagious. Every step felt like walking through a dream, or perhaps waking up from one. I'm Coraline Hayes, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent garden. I'm the owner of Silverstone Manor. The silence deepened, someone's champagne flute slipped from their fingers and shattered on the stone terrace, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed space. Perfect, Inspector Thorne replied, unaware of the emotional bomb he'd just detonated. I have some questions about your evening event permits and insurance documentation. There have been complaints filed questioning whether you have proper authorization for tonight's celebration. As he spoke, I became aware of movement in my peripheral vision. The business journalist I'd spotted earlier was now openly photographing the scene, his camera's motor drive whirring as he captured what was clearly turning into a much more interesting story than he'd expected. Hayes, the journalist called out, stepping closer with his camera raised. David Sterling from the Pittsburgh Business Journal. I've been wanting to interview you about your property portfolio. This is perfect timing. Could I get some photos of you with your venue? More gasps from the crowd. Property portfolio. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. My cousin Julian pushed forward through the crowd, his face showing the kind of confusion that comes from having your entire understanding of reality suddenly rearranged. Wait, he said loudly, Coraline owns this place. Like actually owns Silverstone Manor. That's correct, Inspector Thorne replied, matter-of-factly consulting his paperwork. Miss Hayes purchased the property in 2022, and has been operating it as a luxury event venue. Though we do need to verify some of the permit documentation for tonight's specific event. The crowd erupted, conversations exploded across the garden as guests tried to process what they'd just learned. I heard fragments of shocked discussions. She owns this whole estate. How is that possible? Did anyone know about this? But all I could focus on was Cathy's face. She was staring at me with an expression of complete devastation, her world visibly rearranging itself around this new information. For years she'd positioned herself as the family member with connections, the one who could arrange exclusive bookings and coordinate luxury events. She'd built her identity around being the sophisticated mother of the bride who could secure impossible venues through superior networking. And now everyone knew that the venue she'd been taking credit for was owned by the woman she'd spent the day treating like hired help. Mrs. Thorne, the journalist said, turning toward Cathy with obvious interest. As the mother of the bride, how does it feel to be celebrating at a venue owned by your daughter? This must be such a proud family moment. Cathy opened her mouth but no sound came out. She looked like someone trying to solve a math problem that kept changing while she worked on it. Actually, I said, stepping forward before Cathy could formulate a response, Mrs. Thorne is my stepmother, not my mother. And she wasn't aware that I owned the venue. The journalist's eyebrows shot up. This was clearly turning into a much more complex story than he'd anticipated. You mean your stepmother booked your own venue for your sister's wedding without knowing you owned it? He asked. How did that happen? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone was looking at me now, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of the impossible situation they'd just discovered. Nelson Cole stepped forward, clearly deciding it was time to provide some professional context. Miss Hayes arranged for her sister's wedding to be held here at a significant family discount, he said, diplomatically. She's been personally overseeing every detail of tonight's celebration to ensure it met her family's expectations. A family discount, personal oversight. The phrases reframed everything that had happened today. Every task Cathy had assigned me, every errand she'd sent me on, every time she'd positioned me as the family logistics coordinator. It all took on a completely different meaning when viewed through the lens of me being the venue owner ensuring my sister's wedding was perfect. Lovely Shaw, one of Cassie's bridesmaids, pushed through the crowd with an expression of dawning understanding. Oh my God, she said, Coraline, you've been working all day. You've been coordinating with vendors and handling details and arranging things. I thought you were just being helpful, but you were actually running your own venue for your sister's wedding. That's exactly what she was doing. Alden confirmed, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been admiration. I watched her take business calls all afternoon about property management and legal issues. She wasn't helping with logistics, she was managing her own business operation. Inspector Thorne cleared his throat, clearly wanting to complete his actual purpose for being there. Miss Hayes, about these permit concerns, he said. I need to verify your documentation for extended evening service and your insurance coverage for events of this size. Of course, I replied, pulling out my phone. Tristan Shaw, my operations manager, has all the current documentation. The complaints you received are part of a coordinated challenge from a competitor who's trying to disrupt my business operations. I could feel the crowd's attention sharpen around the word competitor. This wasn't just a story about hidden venue ownership anymore. It was becoming a story about business warfare being fought at a family wedding. The journalist was taking notes now, clearly recognizing that he'd stumbled into something much bigger than a simple feature on young entrepreneurs. Miss Hayes, he said, can you comment on reports that the Whitmore Foundation has been challenging your property holdings across Pennsylvania? I looked around the garden at my family members, all of them staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to confusion to something that might have been a dawning respect. These were people who'd spent years treating me like a helpful auxiliary to their family events, never realizing that I'd built a business empire significant enough to attract coordinated attacks from established competitors. Cassie stepped forward, still in her wedding dress, her face showing the particular kind of confusion that comes from discovering your sister isn't who you thought she was. Coraline, she said softly, how long have you owned this place? 2 years, I replied. I bought it 6 months before you got engaged. And when I said this was my dream venue, she began. I made a phone call, I finished. There was no last-minute cancellation, no special family rate from mysterious connection. I own Silverstone Manor, and I wanted you to have your perfect wedding here. The silence that followed was different from the earlier shock. This silence was heavy with realization, with the weight of years of assumptions being suddenly rearranged. Cathy finally found her voice, though it came out smaller than usual. You let me take credit, she said, and it wasn't quite a question. All day, you let me tell people that I'd arranged this venue, and you never said anything. I looked at her steadily, feeling calmer than I had in years. You never asked if I had arranged it, I replied. You just assumed that if something good happened for this family, it must have come from someone else. The truth of that statement seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Around us, guests were beginning to murmur again, processing the family dynamics they'd just witnessed. Inspector Thorne cleared his throat again. Miss Hayes, about those permits, already handled, I said, accepting the tablet that Tristan Shaw was hurrying over to provide. All documentation is current and properly filed. The complaints you received were filed in bad faith by business competitors, and I have legal documentation proving the challenges are without merit. I signed the verification forms with steady hands, officially confirming what everyone now knew. I was the owner of the venue where my sister was getting married, the person who'd made this entire celebration possible, and the woman my family had spent years underestimating while I quietly built an empire around them. As Inspector Thorne gathered his paperwork and prepared to leave, the journalist stepped forward one more time. Miss Hayes, one final question for my article. How does it feel to finally have your family know who you really are? I looked around the garden one more time, at my sister in her wedding dress, at my stepmother still processing her shock, at my extended family trying to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the reality of who I'd become. It feels like it's time to stop hiding, I said. The reception continued, but everything had changed. As the guests moved toward their dinner tables, conversations buzzed with a different energy than before. Instead of discussing the beautiful venue that someone in the family had managed to book, they were talking about Coraline Hayes, the quiet family member who'd turned out to own one of Pennsylvania's most exclusive wedding destinations. I found myself at the center of attention in a way that felt completely foreign after years of being deliberately overlooked. Extended family members who had barely acknowledged my presence at previous gatherings were suddenly eager to congratulate me on my incredible success and ask detailed questions about my business ventures. Coraline, I had no idea you were so accomplished, my Aunt Genevieve said, appearing at my elbow with wide eyes and a champagne flute. A property portfolio, multiple venues. How did you manage to build all of this? The question was innocent enough, but it highlighted something that had become increasingly clear as the evening progressed. My family had never bothered to ask what I did for a living. They'd known I was financially stable enough to contribute to family events and help with various expenses, but they'd never been curious about the source of that stability. I started small, I replied, diplomatically. One property investment led to another. What I didn't mention was that I'd started building my portfolio during those early years when Cathy was establishing the family dynamic that cast me as the helpful but peripheral family member. While she was positioning herself as the sophisticated stepmother who knew how to navigate exclusive social circles, I was quietly learning real estate law, studying market trends, and building relationships with property developers. Every time I'd been excluded from a family photo or asked to handle logistics while others enjoyed the celebration, I'd channeled that energy into work. Every dismissive comment about my role in the family had motivated me to build something that couldn't be diminished or overlooked. Cassie approached as I was finishing my conversation with Aunt Genevieve, her wedding dress rustling softly against the stone terrace. She looked radiant but slightly overwhelmed, processing the revelation that her perfect wedding venue was actually a gift from the sister she'd always thought of as helpful but unremarkable. "Coraline," she said softly, "can we talk privately for a moment?" We stepped away from the crowd, finding a quiet corner near the garden's rose arbor. The string quartet was playing softly in the background, and the golden hour light was beginning to fade into the deeper colors of evening. "I feel terrible," Cassie began, her voice thick with emotion. "All this time, you owned this place. You made tonight possible, and we treated you like you were just helping out." "You didn't know," I said gently. "I chose not to tell you." "But why?" she asked. "Why keep it secret? This place is incredible. What you've built is incredible. Why let us think that Cathy had arranged everything?" The question deserved an honest answer, even if it might be difficult for her to hear. "Because telling you would have required explaining why I built all of this in the first place," I said. "And that's a conversation about family dynamics that I didn't want to have on your wedding day." Cassie was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the implications of what I'd said. "You built this because of how we treated you," she said slowly. "Didn't you?" "I built this because I needed to prove to myself that I was more than the role you all assigned me," I replied. Every time I was asked to handle logistics while others got to celebrate, every time I was positioned as helpful but not essential, I put that energy into work, into building something that belonged to me. Tears gathered in Cassie's eyes. "I never realized. I thought you liked handling those details. I thought you preferred being behind the scenes. I learned to be good at it because it was the only way to be useful to this family," I said. "But liking it and being good at it aren't the same thing." She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the reception where our family and friends were celebrating at tables I'd arranged, under lights I'd designed, in a venue I owned. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "For all of it, for not seeing who you really were, for not asking the right questions, for letting Cathy," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "For letting Cathy what?" I prompted gently. "For letting her make you invisible," Cassie said. "Even at my own wedding." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You didn't let her do anything. You just didn't know there was another version of this story." "But I should have known," she insisted. "You're my sister. I should have paid attention to what you were building, what you were achieving. I should have seen that you were successful and accomplished. And, God, Coraline, you own multiple properties. You're what, 32? How did you even manage that?" "Hard work," I said simply. "And a lot of motivation to prove that I was more than what people assumed about me." Nelson Cole appeared at the edge of our conversation, holding his tablet and wearing the expression of someone who needed to address practical matters. "Miss Hayes," he said, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a few guests asking about scheduling events here for their own celebrations. Should I direct them to speak with you directly, or would you prefer to handle inquiries through normal business channels?" The question was practical, but it also highlighted the new reality we were all navigating. I was no longer the helpful family member who could be sent on errands. I was the venue owner, the person who made final decisions about bookings and events. "Normal business channels," I replied. "They can contact Tristan Shaw for scheduling and availability." As Nelson walked away, I became aware that Cathy was approaching our small group. She'd been conspicuously absent from the congratulations and questions that had surrounded me since the revelation, but now she was walking toward us with the kind of determined expression that suggested she'd finally decided what she wanted to say. "Coraline," she said, stopping a few feet away from Cassie and me, "could I speak with you privately?" Cassie glanced between us, clearly sensing the tension, but she nodded and headed back toward the reception. "I should check on the dinner service anyway," she said diplomatically. When we were alone, Cathy stood quietly for a moment, seeming to struggle with where to begin. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "Several apologies actually." I waited, not making it easier for her but not making it more difficult either. "I spent today treating you like hired help," she continued. "Sending you on errands, positioning you as the person who handles logistics while the real family celebrated. And all the while, you owned the venue. You made tonight possible." "Yes," I said simply.
I'm humiliated, she admitted. Not just because of how it looked to everyone else, but because of what it says about how I've been treating you. For years, the admission hung between us like a challenge. This was the closest Cathy had ever come to acknowledging the family dynamic she'd created and maintained. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Any of us. Why let me take credit for arrangements you had made? Because you never asked if I had made them, I replied, echoing what I'd said earlier. In all the months of planning Cassie's wedding, you never once wondered how I was able to coordinate so effectively with vendors, or how I seemed to know so much about venue logistics, or why everyone I recommended turned out to be perfect. Cathy winced slightly. I thought you were just helpful, good at research. You thought I was someone who could be useful without being important, I corrected gently. Someone who could handle details while you handled the meaningful family responsibilities. That's not, she began, then stopped. That's exactly what I thought. The honesty was surprising, and more meaningful than an elaborate apology would have been. I built all of this, I gestured toward the venue around us, partly because I needed to prove to myself that I was more than the role you assigned me. Every time I was excluded from family photos or sent to handle logistics while others celebrated, I channeled that energy into work. And now you own multiple properties, Cathy said. You're successful and accomplished, and I've been treating you like the family coordinator. Yes, she was quiet for a long moment, processing the full scope of what she'd misunderstood about my life. The wedding planner kept trying to defer to you today, she said slowly. About decisions and approvals. I thought he was confused about family hierarchy, but he was actually recognizing that you were the venue owner. Yes, and when you were taking those business calls this afternoon, you weren't coordinating vendor details. You were managing actual business crises. Yes, Cathy closed her eyes briefly, clearly experiencing the full weight of her miscalculations. I don't know how to fix this, she said. How to undo years of this dynamic. You don't fix it, I replied. You just stop doing it. You start seeing me as who I actually am instead of who you assumed I was. She nodded slowly. And who you actually are is someone who owns multiple luxury venues, and could have had us all removed from the property at any point today. Who I actually am, I said, is someone who wanted her sister to have a perfect wedding, regardless of how complicated the family dynamics made that. As if summoned by our conversation, the sound of dinner chimes began to ring across the garden, calling guests to their tables. The reception was moving into its next phase, and soon there would be toasts and dancing and all the celebratory moments that make a wedding memorable. We should get back, Cathy said. We should, I agreed. As we walked toward the reception tables, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer the helpful family member who could be sent on errands. I was Coraline Hayes, venue owner, successful entrepreneur, and the person who had made tonight's celebration possible. And for the first time in years, that felt exactly right. The truth, it turned out, had been worth waiting for. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.